Hello everyone, this is Jonathan Williamson from BlenderCookie.com, and today I want to give you a kind of cool tutorial in celebration of passing 16,000 likes on our Facebook page. So this is a pretty cool occasion. It feels really good to have this kind of support and have, this many of you guys following the tutorials and supporting the site and supporting the work that we do. So for this, I would definitely want to be sure to just do a kind of fun, cool tutorial here on creating this kind of 3D typographic effect of this, 16,000 here kind of exploding out towards the viewer of sorts. So we're going to be looking at a lot of things in this tutorial. We're going to be looking at how to model the actual text itself. We're going to look at how to set up the scene with all the particles, the blocks of text kind of moving out. We're going to look at how to create the shaders for each one of the materials. So we've got kind of a steel shader in there for the blocks. We've got a reflective shader on the particles. Then we're going to be looking at rendering it in cycles with motion blur and things like that. And finally, we're going to go in and composite it all together to get a final result. So the first thing that I want to do is let's take a look at the final file to see how things are created. So going in here, first of all, you can see our scene right here. So you can see it's a little bit slow because I've got a whole bunch of particles in here. But mostly, as far as the construction of the scene, what we have here is all these little blocks right here. Each one is a letter or a number. And if we just go in and look at it in local view, you can see that it's basically a beveled cube within the text having been inset in. And so we're going to look at some techniques on how to do this fairly easily. Then if we go back, you can see we've got our particles here. I'm just going to turn off the particles just so that this is nice and quick and so that we can then see the render. So then I have basically a single spotlight that is putting some light, kind of highlight right on these. And then I've got 6 separate emitting planes that then are casting light on our scene. And if we go in and we can just look at the render in this, we are rendering everything in cycles. And if we just take a look at this, you can kind of see what's happening. And I do have most of these set to be invisible to the camera, but basically what I have here is, if we go over to our materials, this back one is kind of an orange one, giving us some of this back orange glow. Then we've got a blue one here at the bottom back, another blue or white one at the top, kind of at an angle above the camera. Then we've got one more blue one on the top, again, just to help kind of give some nice kind of colored fill lighting. And then we have 2 more white ones on each side that then are just helping illuminate the front faces of our text here. And then finally, we do have the single spotlight that is just helping kind of focus some of the light here on this front section. And then you also notice that each one of the cubes are kind of formed in this arc of sorts. So they're kind of like an arc, like shoving towards the camera. And if you go in and actually look at this, you can see I've actually got these animated just very basically, where they're just kind of pushing out, and the whole idea here is just to have them kind of just moving out because I don't really care about the actual motion itself except to get the motion blur. And so if you look at the sides here, you can see there's a little bit of motion blur on those. You can see there's a lot of motion blur on the particles because the particles are moving really, really quickly. And so that, just gives us that kind of sense of movement to make the image feel a lot more dynamic and kind of cool. And since 16,000 is, a very fast growing or dynamic number, I figured that was kind of appropriate. And then lastly, if we go in and we look at all of the compositing, we can see that the compositing is fairly not too complex, but there's quite a bit going on here. So if we look at bring the backdrop in, we can first see down here. I've tried to organize it fairly well using frame nodes, which you remember if you should have seen a tip on that recently on using frame nodes for organization. So first of all, I'm coming in, I'm bringing in a texture. I'm then scaling that texture down, colorizing it, adding in some directional blur to give it that same sense of movement. Then I'm going through a series of masks, going in and adding in the final color to give me something like this that's then going to fit into my background. Then up here, I've got my images are being mixed together. I'm using 2 separate render layers. So there's the cubes, then there's the particles, then those are getting mixed together. Then through all here, there's just a little bit of a vignette effect, some color correction, just doing some tweaking on the colors to give me something like that. Just doing a little bit of extra bit. And then finally, a couple of nodes, just adding in a little bit of glare to the final image just for that little bit of extra effect. So that is the final image and how everything is constructed. Let's go ahead and I'm going to start with a new file and we're going to go through and look at how to create each one of these elements to then get us our final scene. So here in a brand new file, I'm going to get started. And one thing that I forgot to note in the beginning is I am using a development build of Blender. The reason that I'm using a development build of Blender, and this was compiled today, is because of two main features. Number one is motion blur in cycles. In 2.64, motion blur does not exist in cycles, but it does in 2.65, and so we're using 2.65 beta. And then also the anisotropic metal shader, or for doing like brush metal and things like that, is also in development in 2.65, and those are two features that I want to use a lot in this tutorial, and so I am using a development build. If you don't have a development build, you can simply download it from builder.blender.org. Getting anything in the last week should be more than sufficient for what we're doing in this tutorial. So with our new scene here, let's just get started. First thing I'm going to do is we're just going to go and delete the lamp and the camera. We don't need them, and I first want to create my actual text. We're going to delete the cube as well. So let's just hit Shift A and we're going to add in a text object. This text object, let's just go ahead and rotate 90 degrees. So I'll hit R, X, and 90. And first things first, let's go into edit mode by hitting Tab. We'll delete all of our text and then let's put in 16,000 with an exclamation point. I'll hit Tab to leave edit mode. And then what I want to do is choose a much nicer font because this font, you know, even though it's the default one, it is pretty nasty. So we're going to go over here. If we just go to the font section or the text section, we can scroll down and I'm just going to load in for the regular font right here. Let's just click the folder icon. We're going to load this in. And in my case, I'm just going to go to my library and fonts. So this is the system font library. Depending on the system that you're in, you can find that in Windows, I think it's in /Windows/font. In OS X or in OS X, it's in /library/fonts. I'm not sure where it's at in Linux, but as long as you have your OTF font file, then you should be fine. So the font that I'm going to use is one that's included with Mac OS X, and it is called Headline right here, just kind of a nice kind of bold font, something that I kind of liked. And what I then want to do is I want to add some depth to this text. Because the way that this is going to work to get our final effect is basically we're going to take our text, we're going to add some depth to it, we're then going to bevel that, then we're going to add a cube, and then we're going to basically boolean the text out of the cube. And then we're going to do some additional work on that. So what I want to do, let's just add in this, not the offset, but the extrude. Let's just set this to 0.03 ought to be enough. We don't need too much, just a little bit. Looking from the side here, we can see about the size of it. Now let's go ahead and let's hit Shift A. I'm going to add in a cube, and I just want to check for reference the size. So the text size that I want, we're going to use just the default size of the cube. I want the text to basically fill this whole area. And so I'll just scale this up times 2, so S and 2, and that'll then feel pretty good. You know, if we look at this text here, that feels pretty good. So what I then need to do is I need to go in and first of all, convert this to a mesh. So we can convert something to a mesh by hitting Alt-C, and that will convert to curve from mesh or mesh from curve, meta, surface, or text. So in this case, we want text. So let's just do that one. And then I'm going to click an option right down here to keep original. This way it won't delete my underlying text object, and you can see it right here. And so then what I'm going to do with this text object, just in case I ever decide that I want to go back and change the font or anything like that, so that I don't lose the settings that I already have, I'm just going to hit M, and I'm going to move it to my 11th layer. That way, you know, I tend to use like the bottom level set of layers here as kind of archive layers, so it just makes it nice and easy. All right, the next thing that I need to do is I'm going to go into local view on my text, and I'm going to hit Tab to go into edit mode. And since fonts tend to convert a little nastily, like you'll see that, you know, this is not very nice, we first need to do a little cleanup work. So let's first double check that we don't have any duplicate vertices by hitting W and remove doubles. And you can see we removed over 2,500 vertices, so there was a lot of duplicates. Next thing that I want to do is I want to go in and clean these up a little bit. So an easy way to do this, since we have BMesh now, since 2.62 or 3 or whenever it first came out, we have a tool called Limited Dissolve that works really well to get rid of a lot of these surfaces. Because something that I'm going to want to do here in a little bit is I'm going to want to bevel this text after I boolean it. But in order for this to boolean nicely and cleanly, I really want to clean this up as much as I can. So I'm going to hit W and type in, or excuse me, spacebar and type in limited dissolve. And this is a really handy tool that then allows me to automatically just remove and dissolve sections of the mesh based on the angle. And so you can see right now it's made my text really blocky, because right now it's basically taking anything that's less than 15 degrees on an edge angle, it's removing those. So let's just take this down. I'm going to do like 0.5. Let's try 0.5. That looks pretty good. Let's try No, it looks like 0.5 is going to be perfect, because that way we're not losing any form. It's just really cleaning things up. You'll notice it's automatically converted basically all of the surfaces to n-gons, so that's really nice. And now what I can do is I can hit tab to go, or control tab, go into edge mode, and I now just want to go in and remove any edges that do not contribute to the overall shape. So you can see all of these are contributing, most of these are contributing, although we don't need maybe quite this many. Well, no, I won't worry about those. I might remove just a couple of these. You can see that these are all in a, let's see if I go into vertex mode. Well, nope, those are actually all perfectly straight. Actually, it looks like we're going to just not remove any of those. Actually, that all looks really nice. So next step that I want to do is I want to remove, or basically move each one of these to the center and then separate them. So what I'll do is I'm going to just select one piece of text. I'm going to move it over till it's centered on my origin, and notice that my origin, or my object origin, is right here in the center, and that's what I actually care about in this case. So I'm just going to move the one over until it's centered, and then I'm going to hit P, separate by selection. Then I can just hit L to select this one and move it over there until it's about centered. I'll hit P, separate by selection. I'm just going to do this with each one of these, because what we're going to do is we're going to use these as Boolean objects. And so since we have 6 cubes or however many it is, we need to be sure that each one of them has their own object that we can then Boolean. So I'm just going to move these over. These don't need to be exact either. You're never going to notice if these aren't exact. So that's why I'm not too worried about getting them to line up, precisely. I'm just getting it roughly, fairly close. Okay, so now I have, oops, didn't mean to do that. Now I have all of my different text objects. And let's go ahead and just name each one of these. So this one you can see is actually empty. We'll just delete that. So here in the outliner, we can see this is the 1. So I might just call this text_1. This is text_6. So I'm using the prefix of text so that they're all organized together within the outliner. This is a 0, but we've got 3 zeros. I'm going to do 0.1. Text_0.2. Text_0.3, and then text_exclamation. Okay? And then this last one is our underlying text from our original. Let's just, to make this nice and clean, let's change our outliner view from all scenes to just visible layers. That way it only shows what's on our current layer. And there we go. Okay, so now let's leave local view. So I'll just hit numpad/, and we have our cube here. So on our cube, let's just hit G, Z, and 1, and that will move it up along the origin point. Or actually, you know what? No, let's undo that. Instead, let's just grab our text. So I'm just going to hit B, left click and drag, and then we're just going to move this down till it's roughly centered right in there. And then let's hit Control-Shift-Tab, and we're going to go into vertex snapping mode, and then just G, Y, and snap right to that edge. That's just going to snap all of those surfaces exactly to that edge, and everything is lined up perfectly. So you notice I had all of the objects selected. Now what I can do, and I'm just going to show you how to do this on one of the objects, and then I'll replicate it on multiples. So let's first select our cube. We're going to go over to the modifiers tab, and I'm going to add in a Boolean modifier. This Boolean modifier then, I'm going to point to the text1, or the, not the text, text1. There we go. And then I need to change the operation to difference. And what this will do, if we now go into local view, you can see what it's done. It's basically cut out that 1. And since my surface was perfectly aligned with this surface, the surface of the number, then it's just removed that perfectly. And so this works really well. So what I then need to do is I need to clean it up a little bit, because what I'd like to do is I'd like to go in and bevel this a bit. So ideally we would be able to just use the bevel modifier, but you'll see that the bevel modifier really, for whatever reason, just gives atrocious results. We've got weird pieces coming off here, we've got pieces coming off here, and that's because basically the Boolean modifier just gives pretty crappy results for this. Now, we could try doing something like this, which then works, but one of the lines, if we look at our final image, I can just open it up here. So here in our final image, you'll notice that one of the things that looks really nice in this is how we catch the highlight or the light here around the edge of the text. And the reason that we catch that light is because we have a really nice beveled edge all the way around that text. And so in order to get that edge, we need to do this manually, unfortunately. Now, there's multiple different ways you could do it, but just for what we're doing today, this is probably going to work the best to do it manually. So we're not going to use the bevel modifier. Instead, we're going to do it by hand. So to do it by hand, we need to go ahead and apply our modifier here. So I'm going to apply this, and then we're going to hit Tab to go into edit mode, and we want to check this out. So the first thing that we need to do is we want to get rid of some of these extra triangles and such. So I'm just going to hit Control Tab, go into face mode. I'm going to select a few of these. I'm going to hit F, just convert that to an N-gon. I'll select these ones. I'll convert those to an N-gon. So I now have... Actually, let's grab these ones as well. And then let's actually go in, and I want to get all of these. Just like that. I'm going to convert all of that into an N-gon. And I want to do the same thing with all of these. There we go. So now that's one solid N-gon. This is one solid N-gon. We can't do just one solid N-gon throughout the entire thing because currently Blender's beam or N-gon support does not allow us to create holes within an N-gon, and so we have to have these border edges separating the two sides in some way. That's not a big deal, just something to be aware of. Next thing that I want to do is I want to convert all of these inside faces to an N-gon. So I'll just select those, and I'm going to hit F, and that converts all of those. And this way, now I have a really nice, clean mesh. So what I can do now is, since I have this super nice and clean, I can go in and I can bevel this very easily. So if I just hit Control B, we can see that we can bevel this. And if we had not gone in and cleaned that up, that would not have been nearly as easy. For one of the advantages of doing the N-gon is it makes it very, very easy to select things. So the way I like to do this beveling now is I like to go into edge mode, because in edge mode, I can just very easily select everything that I want to bevel. And in this case, it's going to be all perimeters. So I'll select all of the outside edges of the cube as well, just like this. And now, main thing you'll notice is that these inside edges are not beveled. And now I can just hit Control B and bevel this. And I'm going to use the same results that I did last time, which was 0.02 was the amount of bevel that I used. And we can see that then gives us a really nice clean bevel. If we wanted, we could go in and add the number of segments. This segments option was just added yesterday, I believe, but we could go in and increase those segments and then get nice clean text like that. But I actually don't want to do that. The reason being is that I really want to get I really want that flat edge that's giving us that really nice kind of like chamfered look, because that's what's going to catch the light along those edges. You can kind of see it as I rotate around here. That works really nicely. But one thing I don't want is I don't want all of these facets in here. So I'm going to select everything in edit mode. I'm going to hit W and shade smooth, just like that. Okay? But you notice that makes it look really nasty around here on the edge. Like the inside of the text looks great, but the edges are really bad. So we can solve this by using an edge split modifier. So I'll just go in here, choose edge split, and then that just cleans it up really nicely. So now all of these edges are super clean and crisp, but then everything else is smooth. Now, if you want to get rid of some of these sharp angles here, or maybe like this sharp angle here, you could go in, you could turn off edge angle, and then just select all of these edges and hit Control E and click Mark Sharp, and that would then split that. But in my case, I'm all right with those, so I'm just going to use the default edge angle, just make it really quick and easy. So that then gives me one piece of text. So what I now need to do is I need to replicate this exact process for all the other pieces. And just remember that all the steps are basically take your cube, take your text, Boolean that, combine them, clean up all the faces with N-gons, and then bevel those. So I'm going to go ahead and just do this in time-lapse now, and so you can watch the process, but that way you don't have to see the entire thing take well, frankly, forever. So I'm going to, first of all, let's name my cube, and this will be cube-1, and I'm going to hide that, and then I'm going to add my next cube, and now I'm going to time lapse. Okay, we're back from time lapse, and I've got all of my objects created. I just need to rename this one right here as cube_exclamation. There we go. And now what I want to do is I want to offset each one of these. So I'm first going to take the cube 1, and it should be, that's 0 point. There we go, cube 1. I'm going to hit G, X, and just do negative, well actually, you know what, let's do these the other way. Let's select all of these except the 1, just here, G, X, and 2.5, and then I will deselect the 6, G, X, 2.5, and then I'm just going to keep doing this. So I'll deselect the first 0, GX 2 or GX 2.5. There we go. And then I'll deselect this one, GX 2.5, and looks like I missed one in here, GX. No, I just fail miserably. There we go. And then finally the exclamation point. There we go. So now I have all of these set over. Now let's select all of our text, and we're going to push these back to our archive layer as well. So now we have our regular text and all of our text objects. So we don't really care about those. We just want to keep them in the case that we need them. But now you can see we've got all these very nice numbers here. I'm going to take all of these, and I'm just going to move them back to be centered. So that's going to be negative 6.25 right there. So that way they're centered. Now let's go ahead, let's add in our camera. And on the camera, I'm just going to hit Alt-R, Alt-G, make sure it's rotated. Then I'm going to hit R, negative 90 along the X-axis. There we go. And let's go ahead and set the size here. So since the size of our featured images that we're doing are 956 by 400, I'm going to do the same thing. So these are just the featured image sizes on the site, and well, not 40, but 400. There we go. Let's just go ahead and pull this back just so we can start seeing it. And I'm going to just separate or split my view to prepare for rendering. So for this, I like to have one 3D view. I like to have one node editor, and then I like to have one camera view right here. So here in the camera view, one thing that we also want to set is I also want to go and set the field of view. So the field of view that I'm using is 45. So right up here, the focal length, I'm going to set that to 45, and that's just going to allow us to get a fairly nice distance from the camera while also getting a nice kind of range in here, so we see some nice depth on the text and such. And let's go ahead and then start with some of the basic positioning. So the basic positioning, or what I did, is I just basically started grabbing each one of these, and let me just maximize this view so that this doesn't overwhelm it. And what I'm going to do is just to kind of scale each of these up and then position them. So I'm going to go something kind of like this and like this, just kind of starting to put them in an arc of sorts. And then I'll switch to the camera view, and I just kind of start rotate, like double tapping R, rotating it, and then just starting to kind of move these around until I got something that I kind of liked. Say something about like this. rotating, moving. I didn't want any of them intersecting, so I would, move them over as needed. Might move that back along the y-axis a bit. Maybe I'll bring this one over, scale it up, rotate this around like that. Just something that looks kind of cool. It doesn't need to be too precise. I might select all of these and then scale them up. About something like that. We can kind of go as far or as light as we want. We don't have to do anything too specific. Really just whatever looks good to us at the time. And I think, maybe I kind of like this. Since we're kind of exploding outwards, something kind of like this going, this is going crazy because I'm holding it down. There we go. So something kind of going out in all directions like that. Maybe I'll tilt this one up and around just so it kind of looks like it's going out that direction. This one, maybe just bring down just to kind of offset that, just to kind of balance out that angle so that they're not both just going exactly the same direction. Maybe I'll kind of tilt some of these up. Bring this one over a bit more. Give it some more angle. Bring this one over. Kind of like something like that. And then I'll bring this one around and maybe move it over. Let's select all of these again. Just going to move over just a little bit. And I think that starts to feel pretty good. If we look at it, we can see that there's kind of a fairly good distribution along this kind of curve. So that starts to feel nice. All right, now let's look at the rendering. So this is the first part of it. So let's now go in and start looking at the shaders for each of these. So on the shaders here, let's go over to the materials. We're going to add a new one. And this is going to be, we'll call this cube because they're all going to use the same shader. I'm going to switch over to the Cycles render engine. And let's just assign this same shader to all of these. So if I select all of them and then select the last one and hit Control L, I can then make links to the material. And so now all of these will reference the same material. I can go ahead and just click Use Nodes. And I'm going to move this over here just a bit more, just so you can see this a little larger. And this will be our shaders. But one of the first things that we need to do is we need to set up a basic light. So the first light that I'm going to do is our large top plane. So I'm going to hit Shift-A, add a mesh and a plane. And let's just go over here to the outliner. Let's name this. I'm going to give it a prefix of LGT for light. And we'll just say top-white. And I'm going to give it a new material. This will be light-white. I'm going to have 3 separate types of lights, white, blue, and orange. I'm going to give this an emission shader, and then we're going to give it all solid white. And let's then scale it up a little bit, and then we're going to scale it out along the x-axis just to make it really long. Maybe rotate it around like this. Let's move it over here. And now if I switch into rendered view, we can start to see what we get. So it's nothing too special yet, but it gets, it's in the right direction. Next thing that I want to do is let's grab our color here, and we're going to start going in on this shader. So this shader, the first thing I want to do is let's add in the new anisotropic BSDF. So this is kind of for like brush metal and things like that to allow us to get, that kind of like circular pattern that you'd see on like a saw blade or other kind of brush metal. So this is a new shader that's in 2.65. Again, if you're using 2.64, you will not have this shader. So I do recommend getting a development build from builder.blender.org. That will allow you to go download them there, and definitely worth getting because there's a lot of improvements in 2.65. And it is already quite stable. It's going to be released fairly soon here, probably in December, I believe. So what I want to do then is you can see that the direction here is fine. So right now, basically this allows us to do a couple of things. We can adjust the roughness, the anisotropy, and the rotation. Then we also have a normal input and a tangent input. The normal is for like bump mapping and things like that. The tangent is for the for controlling how this anisotropic is generated. First of all, let's increase the power of our lights. We're just going to go up to, say, 4, just to get a little bit more power in here so we can start to see it. And on this, I'm going to go ahead and take the anisotropic down to, say, like 0.2, because I don't want too much of it, because it's not really brush steel, but I just want kind of a steel look. And this does a better job of getting the steel look than regular glossy shaders do. And then let's take the roughness. We'll probably give the roughness of, how about 0.25, ought to be pretty close. Next thing that I would like to do is I want to mix this, or actually no, next thing that I want to do is I want to add some depth to this. So right now, you'll notice that everything just kind of blends together, but I would love it if all of the text in here was super crisp and darker. Well, the way that we can do that is we can make use of vertex colors. So vertex colors allow us to actually color each of the individual vertices. So if I'll just start with the 1 here, I'm going to hit V, and I can go into vertex paint mode. So vertex paint right here. And then I'm going to go down to the paint option and choose dirty vertex colors. What that tries to do is basically any like cavities and things like that, it'll fill with dark and fill everything else with light. And this is cool because it allows us to very easily make this really, basically we'll be able to use this as an input then to feed in a different color into the shader. But what I want to do is I want to clear out these kind of weird things. So I'm going to go into edit mode. I'm going to hit Control Tab, go to vertex mode. And I'm going to select everything. And then I'm just going to deselect this inside perimeter there, just like that. And then hit Tab to leave edit mode. And then I want to enable this button right down here, which basically just allows us to do kind of a face mask, so that anything that's selected, that we selected in edit mode, will be the only things that we can apply the paint to. Because now I'm just going to go down to the paint menu and choose Set Vertex Colors. And that's just going to make everything else white, and then everything else the original color of the dirty vertex colors. And then I can go through, and I'm going to do this on each one of them. So just real quick, I'll go in, I'll select all of this. I'm going to hit Control I, invert that. Select this option. You have to select this option each time, unfortunately. And then I want to go into face mode, hit Control I, and then hit Set Dirty Vertex Colors because I did that in reverse. There we go. Okay, then I'll go over to this one, and I'm going to do Paint Dirty Vertex Colors. Then I go through, zoom in here, best in vertex mode. I'm going to just select all of this, hit Control I. And then I can just hit Shift K to set those colors after I choose this. So Shift K will just set the active color, which by the default color is just white. I can go in here. Let's get rid of that grease pencil. There we go. And I'll select everything. Deselect this. So I'm just hitting Control Shift left mouse and drag. Allows me to do that. And go into vertex select mode. Hit Paint Dirty Vertex Colors. Turn on my mask. And then I'll hit Shift K, just clears that out. And then I'll do this just last 2 times real quick here. About like that. Okay, turn on the mask and Shift K. And then one last time right here. This is the easy one. All right. So there we go. So now I have all of my vertex colors. And what this then allows me to do is I can go in here and just while I'm in the nodes, since I'm not really going to work in this view much, I'm going to turn off my screencast keys. So I'll just click stop. I'm going to hide that just because otherwise it just gives us this mess right here. And since we don't have the hotkey show up here very well, it doesn't really matter. So now I'm going to add in a color and a mix. So I'm going to choose this. I'm going to then drop this into my anisotropic color input. Let's just make this one a darker color. This one a lighter color, and right now it's just blending 50-50 between these. But if I now hit Shift A, add in an input and an attribute, and then feed in the factor value right here into the factor, I can then choose the name here for any one of these, and this allows me to use vertex colors, I can use UV maps, or basically anything else like that. So if I go over to my vertex data here, and I can see that the name of my vertex colors is color, or coal. So I'll just type that in exactly, and now it immediately makes all the outside white and everything else dark. So now I can go in here, you can see this really clear if I go and add a different color in here or anything like that. It makes it very easy to then add a little bit more accent to that. So that's going to help really just kind of improve the overall look here. The next thing that I'd like to do, first of all, let me get a few more samples in here. So I'm just going to go to the sampling section. In the preview, I'm going to put in 100 just so it'll actually clear up a little more. Next thing that I want to do is I want to add in some bump mapping in here just to make this a little bit rougher. So I'm going to hit Shift A and I'm just going to use an image texture. And this image texture comes from cgtextures.com. Actually, I'm just going to drop it in here from my Finder view. And we can just see it's kind of a, well, you can't really see it right here, but it's kind of like a cracks texture of sorts. You can really use anything that has a good bit of kind of noise and value in it. You can use a noise texture or anything else that you really want to use. But I'm just going to use this to basically feed in a displacement map to get some extra bump in this and to then feed in the glossy. So first of all, let's put it into the displacement. So if I just grab this color, drop it into the displacement, we can immediately see some things will kind of happen, but not a whole lot. Right now it's kind of blending across the whole thing. So first of all, let's set this from color to non-color data, and that way it uses the values rather than the actual RGB values. Then I'm also going to set the shading from flat to box. That way it's going to try and basically blend on to each side there. And just make sure that the vector is good. I'm going to use an input texture coordinate, and I'm going to just feed in the generated coordinate there. That way you can start to see it really kind of coming through here. So now it's basically using a generated coordinate around each of these objects, so it's projecting the image from all sides directly onto the box. And we can see what this kind of looks like now. And it's pretty cool. It's definitely a little bit more rough than I would like. So I'm going to hit Shift A. I'm going to add in a converter and a math. This math node I can use by just dropping on here, and I'm going to switch the mode over to multiply, and this will allow me to adjust this value to just increase or decrease the strength of this. And I would like to reverse this. I'd like to, rather than these being raised, I would like them to be pushed in. And so I'm going to set this value to say -0.1. And let's just see how that looks. And that actually looks like it's going to be pretty good, maybe a little bit rough. So let's say -0.05. But the next thing that I'd like to do to make these stand out a little bit more is I would like these to, anywhere that I have those divots, I would like to then show a less glossy material. So it's a little bit more dull. You know, you can imagine like if you have a glossy coating on something and you scratch it, that scratch is not going to be as shiny because it's, you know, you've lost the polish and such. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add Shift A. I'm going to add another shader. This will be a glossy shader. Let's just drop this up here. I'm going to set the roughness to like 4, something higher than this. Let's add in a shader and a mix shader. We'll just then drop that on there, connect it right here, and then we're going to use this image texture. We're just going to pull that right in there and drop that in. And now if I also just take this, let's just go to blue so we can really see this. You can immediately see what's happening. First of all, I've got it reversed, where I would like this blue to be applied to all the dark spot or the spots. So let's just reverse these two, about like that. And then I'll make my glossy shade. I'll just put it on the bottom since that kind of makes more sense. And now you can immediately see what's happening. And it just immediately adds a lot more depth and interest to our piece. But now I don't want this to be blue. And so let's go in. I'll just say copy this color with Control C and then paste that twice. And we'll just use kind of like a darker gray. Maybe something like that. And that'll start to come through as it clears up. And definitely just helps add a lot more interest to it. The surface is a lot cooler. I like that a lot. So that's going to be pretty much perfect. So I'm going to save this, and that's going to be my shader for the time being on these. You know, I might add a little bit more, but you notice that we get these really nice crisp highlights along the borders, along here. So that looks really good. So now let's start working on our lighting to actually make this more interesting. So first of all, let's add in, I'm just going to select this plane. I'm going to duplicate it. I'm going to move it to the bottom, actually move it to the bottom back. And this is going to then be our light dash back dash orange. And we're going to give it a orange light. So let's duplicate this. We'll call this light dash orange. And let's give it then a orange color, something like that. Okay, now the strength is probably too much. Let's just take this down to 2. And then I'm going to duplicate this immediately. And this is going to then be our blue light. So this blue light, let's name this as top underscore or dash back, or yeah, top dash blue. And we'll duplicate this. And this again will be light dash blue. We'll give this kind of a complementary blue color, something about like that, maybe not too blue, maybe right about in there. And immediately our image starts to look a lot more interesting. Let's maybe grab this one here. I'm not going to go quite so orange. We'll maybe do something a little bit more like that, a little more natural. And that starts to feel quite a bit better. Now let's go ahead and add in one more blue one. We're going to bring this up towards the front. And since that immediately blocks the camera, let's go over here to our object data or object properties. We'll scroll right down to the bottom, and then we have this setting here, ray visibility. And this allows us to uncheck any one of these to basically make it invisible to those kinds of light rays. So in this case, I want it invisible to the camera. So then I just do that, and it immediately hides from the camera. Now I can kind of give this like a top, front, down, something about like that, just to give it a little bit more interest. Maybe I'll pull it back a little bit so it's not quite as strong. And then this top one here, I'm going to also decrease the strength on the white. I just feel that it's a little too much. And then one thing that I really like to do on these, I'm going to scale it down a little, decrease the strength, is I like to see what effect each individual light is having. So here in the lights, I'm just going to toggle all of these off. Let's also turn off our world. So we're going to enable use nodes, and then I'm just going to remove this. So background and remove. That way it's completely black. And now let's just enable first our top white light, top white. So we can see exactly what that light is doing. That feels kind of cool. Then we can see our blue light, okay, our other blue light, and our orange light. And so this just gives us a better impression of kind of what each light's doing, what its purpose is, and kind of how we could maybe improve that light. So let's turn these all off, and let's now add in our spotlight. So the spotlight here, I'm going to position basically right in front of the camera. Something about like this. And with the spotlights, we have to really boost the intensity a lot. So I'm just going to multiply this times 50, make it 5,000. And that looks pretty good. I like the angle there, just slightly above the camera. Then let's go in, let's change the blend here. So it's going to make it a lot softer. So it's really just going to kind of highlight, and you can see that the blend right here. So this is kind of the border of the blend. And that's really just going to kind of help highlight the overall focus point here and give a little bit more depth to the image. So it's, brighter here, and then it'll get darker as it goes out. And I think that looks pretty good. We're going to leave it with a white spot. Then let's slowly bring on each one of our lights. And let's just rename this as light. Like that. And then let's go ahead and bring in our top white one. And that might be a little bit strong, so we can see the effects. So let's take that down to 2, make it a little bit more dulled. Let's now bring in our top blue. That feels pretty good, maybe a little strong, but we'll see. Let's bring in our next blue. Okay. We'll bring in our orange one, and that starts to feel pretty cool. I think we're going to leave that just like it is, but I'd like to get a little bit more light on the 1 and the exclamation. So this is where I'm going to use my extra white lights. I'm going to duplicate this. I'm going to scale it along the x-axis, bring it over here to the side, bring it around like that. Just going to give it basically a square, just so it's kind of focused in right in here. Rotate it around a little bit. Bring it out a little further, and then we're going to do the same thing. We're just going to duplicate that again, bring it over here, and we'll leave the names just to save time, but I think that ought to be pretty good. All right, so this starts to get our shaders really nice. But let's go ahead and let's add in the particles now. So the particles are going to be kind of fun, because what we're going to do is we're going to hit Shift-A, add in a mesh and a plane, and this is going to be our emitter. So let's just scale this up, and we're going to rotate it 90 degrees. About like that, and then let's scale it along the x-axis just so it's basically proportional to the size of the camera. Then we're going to move it back here. We'll scale it up a bit more, and then let's just go in. Let's add in a particle system. On this particle system, we'll just do something like that. And the first thing that I want to do is we're going to scroll all the way down, and we're going to turn off, under the field weights, we're going to turn off gravity, because right now if we hit Alt-A and play it, our particles start to fall down. I really don't want that to happen, so I'm going to turn that off, and now our particles just go straight out. So they're going to go straight towards the camera. Now let's increase the strength of our particles, so the speed. So I'm going to use the normal value here. So this is based on the normal of the emitting direction. And so we'll just say how about 30? 30, there we go. So now it's really just like shooting them out way past the camera. We'll just go ahead and bring it back just a little bit. I want them to travel just past the camera, right about like that, because I want to be sure that it's getting nice depth of field in there and that it's really kind of bringing them in. But now to make these a little bit more interesting, I'm going to make them go out in kind of like a splayed pattern, kind of like this, which will just add a little bit more depth to it. So where I can do this is I can go into edit mode. I'm going to select my face. I'm going to hit W and subdivide. And then we'll just repeat that a couple of times. And I'm going to select this inside vertex. I'm going to turn on my proportional editing tool with O, or just drag it on right here. And then I'm going to select my fall off mode to sphere. So then on sphere, when I grab this, pull it out along the y-axis, and then scale this up, it'll pull out something like that. So it just gives a little bit of an arc because it's going to emit particles from each one of the faces. And so if I now hit Alt-A, you can see that they kind of go out in an arc of sorts. So that's just going to give a little bit more direction to this. But right now, I don't have nearly as many particles as I'd like. I'd like to have a lot of them in here because this is what's really going to give it a sense of movement to my scene. So let's go in and we're just going to, let me just take this light and we're going to move it just a little bit up, just like that, just out of the camera view. Okay, and on our particles, we're going to go ahead and give this 8,000 particles, something like that. So there's a lot more in there. So now if I hit Alt-A, you can see we have a lot of particles. Let's now go in and I'm going to include or boost up this random value a little bit. I'm going to boost up the jitter value a little bit. Just kind of randomly distribute these a bit more. Or actually, you know what, that's not quite well. That's the particle lifetime. That we don't really care about that. Let's see, can we emit this from volume? Well, no, we'll just leave it on faces. We'll turn off. Yeah, we'll just do that. Okay. So even though this looks like it's kind of splayed out like that, I mean, it is, you're not really going to notice that at render time, although we could improve this. If we go and we add in a subdivision surface modifier, put that above the particle system, go back to the beginning with shift left arrow, and then hit Alt-A, you'll see that we've got a lot more faces in there, so you don't see that quite as much. And so that works out. The next thing that I want to do, though, is I don't want these just little dots. I want these to be actual objects in here. So I'm going to switch over to layer 2, and we're just going to add in a cube. We're going to add in a icosphere, and I'm going to turn that icosphere down to 1. So it's 1 subdivision, just to give it a little bit more shape. And I'm going to add in a cone. So I've got 3 separate objects here that are kind of typical that you would see in a scene. And I just like I like the idea of these being the particles just as kind of a, you know, almost like an Easter egg of sorts. And so in order to use these as the particles, I'm going to add these to a group. To add them to a group with them all selected, I'm just going to hit Control G. And if I hit F6 now, you can see it's added a new group called Group. And we'll just now call this Particles. And then if I go back over to layer 1, select my particle system, and down here in the particles, in the emitter, in the render section, first of all, let's uncheck emitter so that the plane doesn't render, and then let's enable group right here, and in the group, I can then choose my duplicate group, which is this one, and that will now render all of those little tiny objects, but those are really small right now, so let's increase the size here. We'll just go, say, something about like that. I think should be about right. Let's then increase the random size here so we get a lot of variation in the size, maybe not quite that much. So then I've got all these kind of objects like flying through the scene. So they're kind of cool. So they're just going through like that, just giving that kind of sense of movement and such. But right now you'll notice that everything is just straight up and down. So let's go up here to the rotation tab. We're going to enable rotation. We're going to set the initial orientation. We're just going to set it to normal. Should be fine. I think that ought to work. And let's set the random value to 1. If we go back now by hitting shift left arrow, or let's just split our view here. We're going to add in a timeline right about here. We now hit Alt-A and we can see them just flying through. And now you'll see they're all different orientations. So that just makes it look a lot more interesting. And that's pretty much it. So now if we go in and render this, actually, first of all, let's go back to layer 2 here. And let's select all of these. We're going to give them a new material. We'll call this Particles. And this is merely going to be a glossy shader with, say, a roughness of 0.1. And then we'll make it solid white. So now if we go back to layer 1, we go in and we render this. We can start to see what happens. These start to look kind of interesting. We get some kind of cool lighting going on in them. And it's just kind of cool. Now, I'm going to do one thing. I'm going to hit Shift-B, and I'm just going to drag across my camera view, slightly within the camera view, and that will then just restrict it to rendering that, and just is a lot more interesting, or it just helps kind of consolidate the speed and whatnot. And that looks pretty cool. So let's work with this. But one thing that I want to do on this is I want to add some depth of field to my camera. So on my camera here, we're going to go down and I'm going to use a aperture value of f-stop, and we're going to set that value to 0.5. And then I just need to give it a point of which to focus. So let's hit Shift A. We're going to add it in an empty. And in 2.65, this is new, where now all the empties is set to a menu. So now I can just choose the type of empty that I want. And I'll choose plane axes. And then I'm going to position it right at the tip of that first number. And let's just scale this way up so we can see it. And we'll call this empty DOF for depth of field. So then on my camera, I can then go and I can choose that DOF, and it will then add a subtle depth of field here. So now all the particles have a lot more depth to them, and it looks really, really good. So I can save this now, and we're almost ready to render and start compositing. But right now, none of our cubes have any movement, so they're very, very static, and it's very apparent that they're static. And neither do our particles. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the new motion blur option in Cycles. The motion blur option can be found right here, and the shutter speed then allows us to see how many frames in between the shutter open and close. So the higher the value, the more blur you're going to see. The lower the value, the less blur. Just like, in high-speed photography, the shutter is only open for a very, very tiny amount of time, so then you can capture that very fast-moving object without a lot of blur. Or if you want a lot of blur, then you use a longer shutter time. So if I set this to, say, 1.25, let's go and give ourselves 100 samples. Or actually, we'll just do 50 samples for now. And let's then hit render. And what we'll be able to see here is now we have all of our objects in here have a lot of blur on them. And that's really, really cool. It looks good. And it's done right at render time, so it's very high quality and really nice. Now, right now, it looks really noisy because it is really noisy. So what we then want to do, though, is we want to go in and we want to add a little bit of this motion blur to our cubes, because the cubes don't have any right now. So this is where we need to animate this. So let's go to frame, or actually, let's just hit Alt-A, play this back, something like this. And actually, you know what? Let's take our particles, and we are going to cache these. So we're going to go to the cache, and we're just going to click Bake. That will bake all the particles. So now I can scroll through here. I can find a frame that I like, say something like, or actually, let's just go to the camera view. And I can now scroll through here, find one that I like, maybe one that has some nice objects in it. There we go. I like this. I really like this cone right here. So I'm going to use this, although this is in the way. So let's go. There we go. That looks good. So now we've got this cone right here that I really like. So that'll be a good frame to use as our actual render frame. So now that I have that frame chosen, let's go and let's select all of our cubes, and let's select everything else, and we're just going to hide them. We don't care about anything else. So we're going to select all of our cubes now, and we're going to hit I and insert a location keyframe. Then I'm going to go all the way up here to the end, and we're going to move these like this along the camera, and then we're going to move them out kind of like this, as if they're splaying out just a little bit. Say something like that. And I'm going to select all of these again. I'm going to hit I, insert another location keyframe. So now as we scroll through, they move back. So now let's go all the way back to the beginning, and we're going to move them back here, and then we're going to move them in. It doesn't have to be real exact. All we need is we just need this movement. So now select these, we'll hit I, insert location keyframe, and then scroll through, and then you'll be able to see these move. And we don't need a lot of movement in this. We just need a little bit of movement, because we don't want all of our cubes to then just like go crazy and blur out, but we do want a little bit of movement in there. But that might be a little bit fast or a little slow. So let's go ahead and bring our objects back, and let's render this now. So one thing in Cycles now is we now have this option under Performance. Since it renders via tiles, we can now choose Progressive Refine, and this way it'll just refine the whole image like we're used to, sample by sample. And so this just allows us to see a good preview. And that actually, I think, looks pretty good. You can see we've got a little bit of motion blur on the sides of our objects, just enough to get this sense that it's moving, but not so much that it feels really out of focus or anything like that. So I think that'll probably work pretty good. So you can see, like, you don't need, all you need for the motion blur to actually work is you just need a little bit of movement. Not a lot, just a little bit. So I think that'll work pretty well. So what I want to do at this point is we're ready for the compositing, basically. But in order to prepare for the compositing, I want to do two things. Number one, I want to take our particles here, and I want to move them to layer 2. So I'll just hit M, move them to layer 2. And let's select all of these objects here, our particle objects, particle groups. Let's move them to layer 3. So then I have layer 1, and I have layer 2. So then on down here in our layers section for the render settings, this first one is going to be our text, and it's going to include layer 1 and layer 2, but it's only going to show layer 1. Then we're going to have a particle section like this that's going to include layers 1 and 2, but again, it's only going to show layer 2. And then it's also going to be masked by layer 1. And this way, any particles that happen to be behind the cubes are not going to be included in the render, because since we're going to basically overlay the particles on top of the cubes, we don't want to have to, remove all those or have those shown. We want them to actually hide everything like it should. All right, so now what we need to do is we just need to go in. We don't need any of this, although let's see. No, I think that's good. We don't really need any of these. So we'll toggle that down. And then one last thing I want to do is underneath the film option, I want to enable transparent. And what transparent is going to do, if we go here into render mode, right now you can see it just renders black in the background. But if I turn on film transparent, it renders transparently. And this is going to allow us to add in a custom background image, which is what we want to do. So we're going to do that. And so at this point, we're ready to just go ahead and render a full size, full sample. So let's set this, I'm going to just do 200 samples. About like that. And then that's pretty much all I need to do. And I'm just going to click render image. We'll let this run, and I'll just let this run until it's done, and then I'll be back with you here in just a moment. Okay, so here we are. So if we go down here to our render layer, you can see we've got text, and then we have particles. So this is a little bit noisy, but it'll be fine for what we're doing. I also forgot to turn off the border, and so I'd actually need to render this one last time. So whenever we're done compositing, I'll go in and render one final image at, maybe 400 samples or something like that. But for the time being, this will work well. If we also switch over to this view, we can see our alpha channel is nice and complete. So let's jump right over to the compositing. So I'm just going to maximize this view right here. I'm going to switch over to the compositing nodes. We're going to click use nodes, and I'm going to click backdrop. So then if I hit Control Shift left click on render layers, it'll automatically add in a viewer node, to which then I can then move this around by holding down Alt, middle click and drag, move that over there. I'll grab this, move it in there, and let's just take these, move them over there. And the first thing that I want to do is I want to go in and overlay overlap basically the text on top of the particles. So let's Shift D to duplicate our render layers. We're going to switch this one to particles, and then let's just hit Shift A, add in a color and alpha over. We'll drop that on there, drop that into there, and then that overlays the two together. Okay, so that's the first thing. The next thing that I want to do, though, is let's go ahead and put in our backdrop. So the backdrop that I'm going to use is an image. So I'm going to hit Shift, or actually I'm just going to drop it in here. So from my Finder view, I'm just going to drag my image in here. It's another one from CG Textures, and I'll link to it in the tutorial. It's also included in the source files if you are a citizen member. And you can see it here. It's just kind of this concrete image. So the first thing that I want to do, though, is I want to scale it down to fit. Because right now, if we go in, let's even just do, let's do a mix of these together. And so we can see this real quick. If I just hit Shift A, add in a color and a mix, I'll drop that on there. I'll drop this one in there. And then I want to mix these based on the alpha. We'll just do first the alpha of this, although that's going to mess it up. And you can see immediately what kind of happens. But I want to show the whole image. So if I flip these around, then it just gets really, really big. So that's not what I want. So first thing, let's go into distort and scale. We're going to drop that on there. And this we're going to set to render size. There we go. And you can see we can either stretch it fit it, or crop it. I'm just going to crop it, and that starts to give us our background image. But you notice an immediate problem here is that now we don't have our particles anywhere that is not the cube. So what we need to do is we actually need to add this alpha channel on top of this alpha channel. So we can do this just by using a math node. So if I hit Shift A, add in a converter and a math node, and just set it to add, what we can do here is basically, remember that all color is just, or like all, image, the image here is just values. Black is 0, white is 1. So if we add anything that's white to anything that's black, that's just adding. So if you just think of, basically adding 1 to black, like this, and like that, it's then just going to add them together. So that works very well. We can, either way, it just works the same. And so that gives me my combined alpha channel that I need to mix these together. So if I now drag this into the mix section like that, it then works fine. Now this is reversed at the moment. Let's see. That is that. Oh, whoops. I accidentally connected that there. This is supposed to be there. There we go. So now we have an alpha over. We have our alphas mixed together, and then it combines to give us that. Okay, so that's our first thing. So I'm just going to take these. I'm going to drag them up top there. I'm going to take these, move them down here. And now let's go in and let's start tweaking our background image. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to give it a little bit more distortion. So the background right now is very flat, but our image has a lot of volume to it because it's kind of like coming out at you. And it looks like I've got these two reversed. Oh, no, they're just pretty subtle right in there. So that's all right. So the first thing I want to do is let's add a little bit more like form to this. So if I hit Shift A, I add in a distort node and lens distortion, drop that on top there, and then just start increasing the distortion. You can see it gets this kind of like fisheye effect, and this is going to work really well just to give it a little bit more form to it. And then I can just duplicate my scale, switch this over to relative, and then I'll just start boosting that up just to get rid of the black. And we don't really care if it gets blurry here because we're actually going to do a zoom blur on it, which is the 2 more steps. First, I want to add in another filter. I'm going to just set this to sharpen. And we're just going to sharpen this up, say, how about like 0.1? Maybe 0.1 there. Or no, let's do 0.2. So you can switch between these two. You can kind of see it just looks a little sharper, looks a little nicer. And then I'm going to add in a directional blur. This directional blur then is I'm going to use the zoom function and allows me to just literally like zoom in on it so it looks like it's coming at the viewer. So I'm going to put this at 0.15. And right now that looks, you can see a lot of steps in it. So let's just increase the number of iterations here to say 6. And that's really going to make it look like it's just kind of flying at you. And this is going to really help with our explosion effect of sorts. So if we drop that in there, you can really start to see kind of what's happening. And looks like, let's see, I've got these. Okay, yeah, that should be good. Okay. Next, let's go and let's do a slight color correction on this, or just color adjustments. I'm going to use a color correction node, or no, excuse me, not a color correction, but a color balance. This one here. We'll just drop that right on there. Let's take all these. We're just going to move them over because we've got a few more to add. And these ones, I'm just going to give it some slight tinting. So here on the lift, I'm going to give it a little bit of orange. You can see it just adds a little bit of orange in there. Then I'm going to give it a little bit of blue on the gain just to kind of balance the two out. Let's also boost the values here just a little bit, and then we'll take these ones down a little bit. And I'm basing this off of just my previous experiment. There's no real formula to what I'm doing right here. It's just from the previous image that I created in the first place. That's kind of what I found worked well and that I liked, and so that's what I'm going to use this time. Next thing that I want to do is I want to get rid of a few of these lines in here. So I'm going to hit Shift A. I'm going to add in a filter and a blur. I'll drop that on there, and I'm just going to use a fast Gaussian, nothing too complex. And let's just set this to relative in the case I want to change the scene size. And we'll set the aspect ratio correction to Y since I've got a long image. And let's just take this up. We'll do well. Actually, I'm gonna just do something like this. We'll just make it simple. We'll take it up like 6 and 6, so it's really soft then. But I don't necessarily want it quite that soft. So just to get a little bit more fine-tuned control, I'm going to add in a color and a mix, drop this in here, and then I'm going to drop my original result there, and then I can just kind of blend between these two to kind of fine tune my result, where 0 is all the blur, 1 is all sharp. And so I'm going to put it to, let's say, like 0.6 or something. Just gives me a little bit more refined control. Maybe I'll even increase the blur just a little bit there. So then you can see here's the regular, here's the blurred, here's the combined. So there, it's pretty subtle, but it again just gives me a little bit more control to really get exactly what I want. And flipping these two doesn't really change anything in this case, so that's fine. And the next thing that I want to do is I want to go in and I want to start adding in some blue around the edges. I want some orange in the center and some white in the very center. And that's going to help give it that kind of like explosion effect and darken it up a bit. So let's select these. Let's pull these down a little bit more because I'm going to add in a big section of nodes right in here. And so the first one that I want to do, we can use the new ellipse masks for this really easily. So if I hit Shift A, I add in a matte and ellipse mask. This is really cool because if you just view this, and you need to actually put it into an image. So let's duplicate this. We'll bring it up. And if we then just pull this in here, we can then see exactly what that mask does. So this mask, let's go ahead and make it, why don't we'll leave it right in the center. So X 0.5 and 0.5. Let's take the width down just a little bit. This first one is going to be kind of the orange center of sorts. And then let's take this up just a little bit, just to make it a little bit more round. And then all we need to do is we're just going to then blur the result of this. We go to Filter and Blur. And this one will be, we're going to do the Fast Gaussian again. We'll go ahead and set it to Relative. And then I'm just going to take this up, say like, what do we do? You can kind of watch it right here. You can also watch it there. Say something like this. Maybe to like 13, 14%. Somewhere right about there. Or maybe, why don't we go a good bit higher? We'll make it a little bit more horizontal. Let's say something similar right in there. I think that ought to be pretty good. Okay. So then what I want to do is I want to basically choose this color right here, this mix color. We're going to make this a really nice orange, say something like that. And that's going to immediately drop some orange in there. But rather than just mixing it, I don't want this to actually be pulling away color from this. I want it just to add color. So we're going to set that to add, and that's just going to make sure it doesn't remove anything, just adds it. Get a little bit more color in there. Let's bring these over. Since they're working together, we'll bring that in there. And then I'm going to duplicate this one more time. And this one, I'm going to make a multiply. And the multiply then, I'm going to give it this just kind of a slight brownish gray color of sorts, something like this. And all this is going to be used for is to then tone down the effect one way or the other. So this way I can just kind of add a little bit more darkness to it, say something like that if I need. It's not going to be a big thing, just give me a little bit more control as I kind of work through things. So now I'm going to go in, I'm going to duplicate these. I'm going to add in a second level of them. And this one, I'm going to leave, or I'm going to take, let's boost this size. Let's make this a bit larger. I was just noticing that seemed a little dark. So we'll do something about like that. That'll get a little bit more white in there, get a little bit more color, and we'll just look a little nicer. So then this second one, let's go ahead and we're going to bring in another add value. So let's just duplicate this one. We'll drop that right in there. It's going to add in color. And this one, we're going to just color in white. So I'm just going to copy these. There we go. And then we'll drag that right into the factor, because this is then going to just add in a lot of white directly in the center. So this one is going to be fairly small, something about like this. We'll maybe even bring this down a bit more. And there we go. And that's just going to be set to add. And if we now preview that, we can start to see kind of what it's looking like. Not quite where I'd like it. It's not quite as powerful as I'd like. So let's see. That's there. That's there. And yeah, actually, I think that'll be good. So that's going to give us just a little bit of color. Or, you know, we could even, if we wanted, let's go ahead, let's make this a little bit more blue. Just add a little bit more color to it. Say something about like that. And then let's duplicate this one more time. This one is going to be a multiply. And again, I'm basing a lot of this on my previous experiment. And so I'm actually, in some cases, I'm actually referencing my original file just to double check, see how I did it. Because I spent about an hour or so just kind of tweaking this and kind of figuring out what worked, what didn't work. So in this case, I'm going to duplicate this again. So I've got 3 sets. I'm going to drag this one right into this here. And this one, I'm going to go ahead and set to, I'm going to make it fairly high at like 0.9 and about 0.3, something about like that. But then the one thing I'm going to do on this is I'm going to invert the color. So I'm going to go to filter, or excuse me, convert color and invert. I'm going to drop that right on there, and then that's just going to flip those 2 around to then give me that. I'm also going to make this one just perfectly white, about like that. Or excuse me, no, let's take that, let's put that blue there, and then this one will be white. There we go, something more like that. So this one, let's also take this up a little bit along the y-axis. The reason being is that since our explosion is kind of coming up, you know, like this, in that direction, I want just a little bit more orange around the top. Maybe not quite that high, so I can bring this down just a little bit more. There we go, maybe something about like that. And then this one is not nearly as strong as I would like it to be. And so what I'm going to do, let's take these, bring them over here. We're going to add in a converter, a math, and a multiply right here. So then this multiply value, I can just slide up until I get really the strength that I want. And then maybe we'll go ahead and we'll bring these down a little bit more, really make them a lot smaller. Kind of tweak the blur setting here a little bit. You know, so this then just allows me to really kind of control that multiply function, or excuse me, the add function just a bit to really control my color. So I can take that down maybe like maybe something about there. We'll make this one a little bit smaller. There we go, because that's going to be the behind, kind of the halo around my text, but then also the bright point of kind of the explosion of sorts. And so I want those to really have some bright colors in there. So that'll be good enough for now. You know, we can really play with this here in a little bit as we work through and get exactly what we want. And so at this point, I'm ready to go ahead and drop the background behind my image here. So here on our render layer, let's then just drop this right in there. And we can look at that. So it drops it in, immediately makes things look quite a bit more interesting. And I like where it's going. But now I want to be able to, let's go ahead and first of all, add in a basic vignette around things. And the vignette is just to kind of darken these corners, again, to bring more focus right in here. And so the vignette is, now that we have these ellipse masks in Blender, these are really easy. So I'm just going to duplicate this. That's going to be my vignette of sorts. So let's then duplicate this as well. And this is going to be our multiply. And we're just going to multiply this one over that. And that becomes our vignette. So it's really, really easy to do a vignette in Blender now. Rather than having to do that kind of like lens distortion, multiply, you know, get the math values and then do all that. Now we can just do something like this and it works really, really nicely. So now I can just tone this down and it will give me my nice vignette effect. So I don't want to do too much, just a little bit, just to really kind of darken that up. The next thing that I want to do is to pull in a, let's see. Okay, right now, one thing that's been bugging me is our particles are not really showing up a whole lot. So you can see that it's really just not showing nearly as well as I would like it to be. So what we're going to do then is, first of all, with the vignette, one thing I don't want it to do too much is to darken up the sides here. So I'm going to add in another mix node right here. I'm going to set this to mix. And this one is going to mix the output of my vignette with the output of my previous node. And then what I can do is I can use my color ramp here to basically pull, or excuse me, not this, but my alpha channel right here. I can drop that into the factor. And now you'll notice that, first of all, right here, we have everything is vignetted. Then right here, my text is not vignetted. So it really helps just kind of separate the two a little bit, but still the particles are vignetted, and it just kind of helps separate the two. So I like that a lot. Things start to get a little messy right in here though, so I'm going to just hold down Shift, drag across here to create a reroute node. I'm just going to pull that up there. I'll drag in another one, and then just pull this over like that, just so it gets a reroute point, making it much easier to read my noodle setup. Okay, let's grab our output nodes here. I'm just going to pull them over because we've got a few more nodes to add. First of all, let's go in, let's add in a color RGB curves. We'll drop that in there, and let's just kind of push this up a little bit. Push the brightness. We'll take this down. Just help kind of push our brights and darks just a little bit more. I'm going to go in, let's add in a color correction node, and the color correction node can then be used to really kind of tweak each of our individual values here. So I might go in and, we can kind of play with this a little bit. I might boost the saturation of the midtones and the highlights just a little bit, or maybe boost the saturation of the colors. So we can see this. If I just hit M to mute this, I can kind of see the difference. Maybe I'll actually desaturate the midtones just a little bit. Then maybe I can go in, increase the contrast of some of my midtones, just get a little bit more punch to my image. And then maybe I'll let's try boosting the gains just a bit. We don't want to do too much, but you can really just kind of play with this until you get something that you like. And I'm just going to barely tweak it. If I even just toggle this on or off, you can see it's just barely tweaking it. Maybe I've gone a little bit overboard on some of this, so I'll kind of tone some of these down just a bit. It doesn't take much. Okay, I kind of like where that's going. It's just a subtle change, but not a whole lot. I'm also going to go ahead and now add in a filter and do another just sharpen on this, just a very subtle sharpen. So if I set this to sharpen, you immediately see what it does, but if I set this to say like 0.05, makes it pretty subtle. If I mute this, then you can see the effect. Very, very subtle. Maybe we'll even go to 0.1. So pretty subtle there, but I like the effect. Next, we're going to add just a little bit of glare on this. So if I go in, I hit Shift-A, Filter, and Glare. I'll drop this in here. I'm going to pull it down. And this first one is going to be a ghost. So if I choose the ghost, and I go in, I'm going to turn the mix all the way to 0 or 1, so I only see the final effect. And then I'm going to set the threshold down to say like 0.6 or so it starts to pull in a lot more of this kind of stuff, a lot more of the values in there. I can also increase the iterations a bit more, make it a little bit stronger if I want. But I think I'm actually going to keep it pretty subtle around 3, and then I'll just boost the quality to high. Or actually, we're going to leave it at medium just for the sake of doing this. Then I'm going to duplicate this down again. And then this second ghost, or second glare, is going to be we're going to do a fog glow. And this fog glow then, we're going to use fairly similar settings, but I'm going to boost the size up to 9. And so then to control, or to add these together, we're going to use a color node, or mix node again. We're going to drop this right in here. We'll drop this one in the bottom, and then I'm just going to set these to add. Because then what this allows me to do is now I can go from 0 to 1 to then increase the amount of glare there. So I can just slowly start adding this in until I get what I like. And I might just go to say like 0.4 is nice, because we really don't want to go too high. If I just mute this, then we can see the effect. So it's adding just a little bit of extra effect there. A good glare should probably be pretty subtle because it's really easy to overdo these. And then I'll add in the second one. And so then we can see the result. Again, it's very, very subtle. We might boost this one up just a little bit more. Yeah, see, it's very, very subtle. But I like that. Okay, maybe we'll take the threshold on this one down one more. Say something like that. And that starts to give us our final image. Now, it's not quite as close to our original as maybe we would like. You can see that our original has pretty different colors. If we bring this down a little bit, then bring this back, here we go. You can see the results. So this one has a few more particles in it. You can see it a little bit more clearly, but it's pretty darn close. So if we just even go in here and maybe on this image, on our color here, we can go in, let's add in a filter and, or let's see, color, hue and saturation. And we'll maybe just drop the saturation on this just a little bit. Maybe something about like that. We can use a slightly darker blue right here. So we'll tone this down. Right over here, maybe we'll darken this up just a little bit. And then we go back in here. We compare this. And then we bring that in. You can start to see it starts to get a little bit closer. In the tutorial one, I've got a little bit more white in the image. And again, I've got a few more particles, so my blue lights are not quite as strong. But overall, I'd say that was pretty close. And so that's our final result for the tutorial. Going and looking at it, just think of everything that we covered. We looked at how to create these kind of like complex text blocks by using an actual text object, adjusting the font, then booleaning those out of actual cubes and then cleaning them up, how to work with the bevels. We went in, looked at the lighting and such in cycles, the shaders in cycles with the anisotropic shaders, looking at motion blur with cycles using again, just the motion blur setting. Covered a lot of ground in this, so hopefully it's not too overwhelming, but hopefully you guys enjoyed this. I know it was a lot of fun to do. If we look at this, maybe we can see these are definitely a little bit more subtle than I would like. So if we look at these two, oh, well, here's one of our problems. Here we go. I'd done the wrong image right here. I'd used actually the image value. And so if I bring this back, now we can see all of our particles in there, whereas before I didn't actually have all of those in. So that would have been just one of my small problems there. So now if we bring this in, now we can start to see we have far more particles and it looks much more similar to what we originally wanted. So you can see a lot more in here and then a lot more in here. And so that's much closer. All of our particles are actually there, and that's much closer to the effect that we are going for. And so to then do this one last time, probably what I'd do at this point is go through and do one final render. I might also just clamp these, clamp them just to make sure that no color value goes above 1. So like none of these bright spots would go above 1. But at this point, basically what I'd do is I'd just go in, I'd probably set my render to like 400 samples and then let that run and then show the final result there. But it's pretty similar. I might tone down the strength of my vignette. So my vignette is right here. Oh, and actually, let's do one last thing just to kind of help with the overall organization. One thing that I do with a lot of my files is I will group things and frame things. So if I hit Control G with these selected, I can make a new group. I can name this as vignette. And then maybe I can expose my factor value here, name that as strength. And then I just have a single vignette node that then I can toggle down and I can look at that. I can then go in and do things like color or frame nodes and such. I'm not going to do that for the time being. If you looked at the original file, then you'll know what those were. And we covered the frame nodes in a recent tip on using frame nodes for better organization within Blender. But there you have it. There is 16,000 likes on our Facebook page. Thank you again all for all of the very, very humbling and incredible support. You guys are awesome. So thanks again, and I hope you enjoyed the tutorial.